Business and Institutional Furniture Manufacturers Association committees for office seating, lounge and public seating, and educational seating. He's also a noted speaker and most recently presented at the 2016 Ed Spaces and 2016 Blue Ribbon Schools of Excellence conferences. And we're very excited to have Josh here today, and we're also excited that 3 lucky registrants will win an active seating piece from Safeco. And we'll be announcing those winners at the end of our webinar. Right now, we're ready to begin today's session. So Josh, you can get started whenever you're ready.
Thanks so much, Liz. I really am excited to present to you all today. We've got some a lot of information. This is jam-packed. In fact, if you're just logging on, you will actually get a chance to participate in the webinar as we go forward. You know, today's topic is, I should probably give you a little background about myself that Liz didn't mention. So I'm the product of 2 educators. Both my parents, my dad was a university professor, my mom taught art. So I got to see sort of the benefits of that, both sides of the education, both being a student and seeing them. And you know what we want to share with you today is that there are ways and distinct ways that we now know that can improve learning. And it goes beyond just sort of what we do in terms of materials and specifically not just the technical equipment, but actually the physical work environment. This can have positive impacts in terms of what we're going to see at classroom management, how the health and wellness of the individual student is affected, student engagement, and the ultimate holy grail will address the question of, does this have any effect on academic performance? So I've really categorized this, and to make this easy to remember, I want you to think about the term apple. And so apples are pretty prominent. We give a teacher an apple a day, you know, keeps the doctor away. Apple in this case stands for activity permissive learning environments. And I'd like to cover 4 things today. So let's just see how the problem really, what is the state of the current problem, and how are the ways in which we're teaching children, young adults, and how does that relate to the environment which we're teaching them in? What does science tell us in terms of what's happening to the body? And I want to give you 3 key lessons that we're learning as we're moving into this space. I know many of you were kind enough to send in your questions beforehand, and as I was looking through those thoughtful questions, they asked, what do we do? What are the next steps? What are some lessons learned? And I want to give you 3 key lessons, and then 5 real benefits. And some of this is from the latest research that literally hot off the press in terms of some of the studies that talk about the positive results from Apple. So to go into this discussion, I think we need to just take a step backwards for a second and understand we're talking about inactivity and sedentary behavior gaining a lot of press in the news. And so, you know, you may have heard the term that sitting is the new smoking. You know, about 3.5 years ago, Nilofer Merchant, who was at one of these TED Talks, related the mortality of people by how often they sit to that of lung cancer and associated with smoking. And there was a pretty close correlation in the number of people who were inactive and their mortality and those who actually died of ingesting a carcinogen from smoking. That has gone forward, in fact, to people in industry like the head of Apple's, Tim Cook, who said, you know, sitting is the new cancer. The bottom line is, what does this have to do with our learning environments? It's getting a lot of press. You know, educators are learning more about it. Kids are learning more about it. And I think that when we provide information to people, they can make more educated decisions. I see that happen in the past. I'm in the health and safety realm. I'm an ergonomist. I look at what is some of the other things that have occurred over the course of recent history that have changed people's perception. I would say smoking is one of them. If you look at, I don't know if there's anyone here who's ever been on a plane where smoking was actually illegal, but years ago that was the case. In less than a half a generation now, it is no longer permitted in either public transport or in restrooms or restaurants and public spaces. So what we know is that people's perception can be changed by knowing more. We'll see how this relates to the learning environment because we're starting to learn more and more. I'll make it even more personal. So I grew up in upstate New York, and I have an older sister who actually is a teacher at the Syracuse University, and a younger brother. And we actually grew up, and my parents had a pickup truck. The pickup truck was affectionately known as the Green Hornet. Interestingly enough, there weren't a certain safety and health feature that you would think that exists in most vehicles today. What do you think that is? That's right. There were no seat belts in that truck, nor seating for five. In fact, we used to sit in the back and fight over the spare tire. The point of putting this up here is that how many of you would put your children, your grandchildren, your nieces and nephews in a car without a car seat if they're appropriate age? So in less than a quarter of a generation, our belief about a certain behavior, riding in a vehicle under strain, has changed dramatically because we now know what we didn't know. Well, guess what? We now know what we didn't know, and in terms of the learning environment, it's changing dramatically. So let's get you active, and actually I'm going to give Liz a chance to ask you all a question that relates to sort of your perception on how inactive kids are during the day. So I'm going to turn it back to Liz.
So you'll see a poll question up. We want to know, how many hours a day do you think children are sedentary, not counting the 8 hours that they're sleeping? Let's just see what we all think.
So while you're doing this, and please go ahead and click on the poll, and we're going to give you about 30 seconds to click on the poll and the individual results, and you just click on that. I would tell you that you would think that, kids are really active, they're boisterous, right? And so this is the amount of time that they're just completely sedentary. So we don't include the 8 hours of sleep. So we've got 4 to 6, or is it 9 to 10, or is it 13 to 4? And these are in hours, by the way. And so let's take a look at that. And, I know when kids come home from school, when I was growing up, we used to go out and play baseball or basketball. A lot of kids now will find themselves either on Netflix or watching some sort of playing or watching video games. So, Liz, what are the results? Let's see what we got. So it looks like most of you said 7 to 8 hours a day. Well, let's take a look and see what the actual data says. Those amount of time that kids, it's 13 hours and change. So today's activity breakdown, excluding sleep, is over 13 hours. There were a handful of you who picked that, so you probably saw this presentation. But Dr. Mark Bendon at Texas A&M University published this and said that, this is an important finding. We're finding that kids are thought to be pretty active. That's a lot of time where they're sedentary. In fact, the very active portion of their day is less than a half an hour. Less than a half an hour. We relate that to sort of the adult population and where many of us spend our days in our jobs, that the amount of time that we spend has gone up 80% since when I was born, and now accounts for about half of all jobs. And adults spend about 15 hours a day, non-sleeping time, absolutely sedentary. So this is really an important item, and I think it accounts for one of the reasons why this is an important topic for us today and why the sign up for today's webinar was so great. How many of you have seen the loss of physical education in the schools, right? So less than 2% provide daily fit PE. We see a lot of activity where kids are just not that active anymore, and we know the health benefits of moving around during the day. So how can we balance this?